Hey everybody, this video is called Victory Continues, and today we're going to open a new study in the Bible through the book of Judges. And we're going to be, Lord willing, in the book of Judges from between now and somewhere around mid-August. So the kids will be starting to go right back to school before we move into our next study. But the book of Judges, a little introduction to it is the author is unknown. It is believed, however, to be the prophet Samuel that wrote it, along with others in the Jewish Talmud that believe that as well. In Judges, it was written somewhere approximately between 1045 to 1000 BC, which, is before Christ. In Judges, the main thing I want us to get out of Judges is that we're going to see God's faithfulness even when man just blows it after one another. And so we're going to start here in Judges 1:1, and it says, "Now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, Who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them?" So we see the book is open in here in Judges with the book the settling with between the times after Joshua's death and the flashbacks that summarized the conditions while he was alive, and you'll see more details on that in the next chapter. But the chapter is opening just like Joshua 1:1 did when it spoke about Moses' death. And it was sad when Moses had passed. We know that Moses brought Israel out of Egypt. He was a great leader, but they at least had Joshua to succeed from when Moses died. The torch was passed on to Joshua. And then Joshua would bring Israel into the promised land. However, Joshua never appointed a leader at the end of the book of Joshua that we can see. So there was no leader after Joshua to guide the nation. And so Israel goes into a period of judges with no king, no president, no prime minister, any of those leadership positions that we might think of today. And I know some of you wish that we had no president, and that's not the right mindset. We still need a leader. We need an actual leader, though, in the White House. And judges here aren't those who are sitting on the court like the Supreme Court, who are politically biased in most cases, where they make decisions based off whatever political party appointed them, with actually disregarding the Constitution. With that said, though, I do believe the Roe versus Wade reversal was the right decision. I do not believe that abortion, genocide, or any of that is covered as a right in our Constitution, and the Supreme Court is to make decisions in defending the Constitution. But we won't get too far off the trail right there. But the Hebrew word shaphat is more like a hero leader. So the judges of Israel, they were more what you should think of as leaders that were heroes. And many people, they avoid the book of Judges as it may be confusing as you go through it. It may be difficult, and it might seem dark age to some people, like for Israel's history. But if we skip the book, you skip out on seeing the character of God, that even though man is totally depraved, that man blows it, man, just keeps making sin after sin and messing up and living like wicked, we still see God's love and graciousness in this book and how he lovingly corrects his people. And man and judges may depress us, when we go through and we see what Israel did over and over and over again. It might be depressing for us to see. But the bigger thing that we need to get out of this book is that God is wonderful. And Judges, it's a book of disobedience and disaster of man, but God still provides direction and deliverance. In verse 2 says, "And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand." So Judah's tribe received God's first go ahead to push for a more through conquest of its territory. And the reason probably lay in God's choice that Judah be the leader among the tribes and set the example for them in the other territories. And after Joshua was gone, we saw that Israel seeked the Lord, and God guided them for a short period of time. And you'll see it as a constant pattern through the book of Judges, that when Israel seeks the Lord, God never failed to deliver or help his people. But in verses 3 through 7 it says, "So Judah said to Simon his brother, 'Come up with me in my allotted territory, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I will likewise go with you to your allotted territory.' And Simon went with him. And Judah then went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand. And they killed 10,000 men at Bezek, and they found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek, and fought against him, and they defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Then Adoni-Bezek fled, and they pursued him, and caught him, and cut off his thumbs with big toes. And Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather scrapes under my table, as I have done, so God has repaid me. Then they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died." So these verses in 3 through 7 are a little graphic for some, but Judah acted rightly by partnering with another tribe that was blood brothers, as you can find back in the book of Genesis 29 verse 33 through 35. And God gave them success by delivering their enemies into their hands when they seeked the Lord, obeying his guidance, and they worked together. And the leader of Bezek was Adoni-Bezek, which meant Lord of Lightning. And the enemy may have had a fearful name, but Judah and Simon defeated him. And you may be a little disturbed with the punishment as mentioned with Adoni-Bezek, but he also had 70 kings who had cut toes and fingers that were cut off. In verse 8 through 20 it says, "Now the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem and then took it. They struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who dwelt in the mountains in the south and in the lowland. Then Judah went against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kirjath Abba, but they killed Sheshai, Ahinam, and Talmai. And from there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kirjath Sepher. Then Caleb said, 'Whoever attacks Kirjath Sepher and takes it, to him I will give my daughter Akshah as wife.' And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, so he gave him his daughter Akshah as wife. And now it happened when she came to him, that she urged him to ask her father for a field. And she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, 'What do you wish?' So she said to him, 'Give me a blessing, since you have given me land in the south. Give me also springs of water.' And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Now the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the south near Arad, and they went up and dwelt among the people. And Judah went with his brother Simon, and they attacked the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath, and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. And Judah took Gaza with its territory, Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. So the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland, because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had said. And then they expelled him there, the 3 sons of Anak." So here it's recorded that the city of Jerusalem, it fell to Judah, and it was occupied for a time as Adoni-Bezek was taken there, and he died. But he later fell back to the Jebusites, as you'll see in the next verse of 21. And later, at the end of the year, we're going to look at Israel conquering the city again 400 years later in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 5. And we're going to be in 2 Samuel, Lord willing, right around the holiday season. And Judah also conquered Hebron, and the city was given to the faithful Caleb and his family. And remember, Hebron was the ancient city of Abraham, and the city that discouraged the 10 spies who were unfaithful from taking the promised land back in Moses' day, because of the Anakim that were living there, in which we looked at the book of Numbers chapter 13 at the very beginning of this year. Numbers 13, 22, and 23. And so Israel, they had three major geographical divisions of Israel. There was the mountains, or the hill country, where the mountain regions were between Jerusalem and Hebron. And then there was the south of Negev, between Hebron and Kadesh Barnea. And then there was the lowland, or the foothills, that ran north and south between the coastal plain and the central mountain region. And in verses 12 through 15, I'm going to try to share a separate link under this video of a Charles Spurgeon sermon on Judges chapter 1 verses 12 through 15. And that was called Ask Us Asking, a Pattern of Prayer. But Charles Spurgeon, he presented how the request of Aska to her father Caleb gave a parable of prayer. And Spurgeon, he preached that sermon on June 2nd, 1889, which is approximately 133 years ago. And the city of Palms was another name for the city of Jericho. And the city of Palms was likely the southern end of the Dead Sea. And Caleb's victory over the Anak sons showed what a trusting Israel could accomplish when they had the faith. And the sons of Anak were large men who were fierce warriors that it took God's help, but Caleb defeated them, as we know about from looking at Joshua 15 verse 13 through 14 about a month ago. In verse 21 says, "But the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem, so that the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day." So up until about the time of the writer of Judges, the tribe of Benjamin failed to cast out the Jebusites, and therefore they lived in constant military and spiritual danger. So their lack of obedience to God was going to be cost worthy. In verse 22 through 26, it says, "And the house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. So the house of Joseph sent men to spy out Bethel. The name of the city was formerly Luz. And when the spies saw that a man coming out of the city, they said to him, 'Please show us the entrance to the city, and we will show you mercy.' So he showed them the entrance of the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and his family go. And the man went to the land of the Hittites, built a city, and called its name Luz, which is its name to this day." So this is a rare but interesting combination of the two tribes that came from Joseph's in the one group in the house of Joseph. And they were Ephraim and Manasseh, and their victory was because the Lord was with them. And they seemed to use the events surrounding Rahab and the conquering of Jericho as a pattern, and a successful pattern at that. In verse 27 through 29, it says, "However, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and its villages, and Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites were determined to dwell in the land. And it came to pass, when Israel was strong, that they put the Canaanites under tribute, but did not completely drive them out. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer, so the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. So Manasseh and Ephraim failed to drive out all the Canaanites, as they compromised with the Canaanites, and they thought that they could use them to their advantage, but were they wrong? And Gezer does not belong to Israel until Pharaoh gave it to Solomon in 1 Kings 9, verse 16. In verse 30 says, Nor did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of Nahaleo, so the Canaanites dwelt among them and were under tribute. So the tribe of Zebulun failed to take all that God had portioned for them. And the people of Jebulun thought that they could make their incomplete obedience work to their advantage, especially economically. So they had their own motives behind their actions, why they did not fully obey God. And they failed to appreciate that the Canaanites who dwelt among them would eventually lead them to social and spiritual crisis. And, likewise, when we don't separate ourselves from the world, we allow social and economic decisions that's going to affect our physical health, our emotional health, and our spiritualness. In verse 31-32 says, Nor did Asher drive out the inhabitants of Acco, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or of Elab, Achzib, Helba, Aphik, or Rehob. So the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. So the tribe of Asher also failed to take what God had portioned for them, and each tribe who failed made it easier for the other tribes to fail. It was like a domino effect. And the tribe of Asher failed completely to dislodge the Canaanites. In verse 33, Nor did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, or the inhabitants of Beth Anath, but they dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath were put under tribute to them. So the tribe of Naphtali also could not break the trend with the other tribes, as they accommodated and compromised with the Canaanites, putting them under tribute. In verse 34-36 wraps up the chapter. Says, And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountains, for they would not allow them to come down to the valley. And the Amorites were determined to dwell in Mount Heres, in Ajalon, and in Sheobim. Yet when the strength of the house of Joseph became greater, they were put under tribute. And now the boundary of the Amorites was from Ascent at Akrebrim to Selah and upward. So like the other tribes, Dan had a territory given to them, but they failed to claim the power of God to conquer that territory. And later, they capitulated even more by defeat and migrating to another territory in the north. And they become idolatrous, and we'll see that further in detail next month in chapter 18. And the people of Dan, they were pushed around by their own enemies. And that is why obedience to God is vital, not half-hearted obedience, because half-hearted obedience is still disobedience, and there will still be consequences. But to wrap up our opening chapter today, we start this book where it opens speaking sometime after the death of Joshua and how Israel sought the Lord. And I want to look at Luke chapter 11, verse 9. It says here, So I say to you, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. So when we ask God and we seek God in sincerity, we should expect that he will answer us. And we saw in today's chapter that Judah and Simon defeat Bezek and their king. And we saw Judah's victories in the southern part of the land given to Israel. In today's chapter, it also shows the complete victories and defeat. We saw that the tribe of Benjamin didn't take possession of Jerusalem. We saw that the house of Joseph conquered the city of Bethel. And we saw that Manasseh and Ephraim, they failed to drive out all the Canaanites and the consequences of such an action. And we saw the tribe of Zebulun compromised and accommodated the Canaanites by putting them under tribute. And we saw that the tribe of Asher, they failed in taking full possession of their land. And we saw that the tribe of Naphtali compromised and accommodated the Canaanite, just like the tribe of Zebulun. And the chapter, it ends with talking about the tribe of Dan failing to take full possession of their land. And so that's going to wrap up this video today, and we'll see you next in chapter 2, as we'll look at God's mercy even when Israel's fails. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening. God bless. We'll see you next.